Hello, how are you out there? Can you hear me? Yes,
Hi,
and
Professor. Yes, we
also?
can.
Excellent. Okay, we're moving along. So you've had your skeletal system, the bones, right? The exam. Many of you have had that exam already, the lab exam, I guess. Okay, let's start class. So today we're going to focus on articulations or joints and also start with the muscle system. So articulations and joints are where bones meet, they move, and sometimes they cry out because if we do movements that are very painful and the articulations really feel it. Okay, and the articulations are quite complex structures and they give us the ability to move around and to move the bones. And one particular important aspect is that this movement of bones can be very painful if they're not protected, if they don't have a cushion. And that's why you have that articular cartilage. But more complex articulations have extra structures to help the bones when they move, such as the synovial capsules, bursa, and fat pads. So they can be quite complex and very interesting to study. So some articulations cannot move, like if you think about the skull, the bones in the skull, the, the articulations that bring them together, they don't move. And some are movable, like the diarthrosis, like the knee joint or the shoulder joint. Those freely give the bones free movement. And then there's some that are in between. So we classified articulations based on their structure. That means what tissue are they made up, and on their function, if they're movable, immovable, and so on. So, as I was saying, some articulations or their architecture is quite complex. So, in the shoulder, if you think about, we can move the bones in all directions, up, down, and round, and all this has to occur without any pain. So, we have lubricants in there that allow the smooth movement of one bone upon the other. Then you have ligaments that tighten the, attachment of one bone to the other. Then we have tendons that attach the muscles to the bone. And we have extra ligaments. And ligaments, they don't receive blood supply. So if they are damaged, if they're ruptured, they cannot be, they don't regenerate. So you see here an example of the shoulder joint, and here an example of the knee joint, and you see the bones that are involved in this joint and the tendons and the all ligaments, and especially if you think about athletes that are constantly putting pressure on these articulations, and the kind of movement has to be very well balanced so not to destroy and damage these articulations. Okay, so here is this table or graph that shows the classification of the articulations based on their structure. That means mostly what type of tissue they're made up and other components, and also what kind of movement they provide for. So in terms of structure, they can be made of fibrous connective tissue or cartilaginous tissue, or in a synovial joint, it's more complex. It has all kinds of tissues. One interest aspect of the joints that are made up of cartilage is that cartilage does not receive blood supply. So blood vessels cannot grow into cartilage. So how do they get their nutrients? By diffusion. And you will see in the knee joint, there's a liquid known as the synovial fluid. And as you move, there are these waves that are generated and can hit on the cartilage and provide a way of feeding the cartilage, giving them nutrients. So there are many studies on cartilage because this kind of tissue secretes chemicals that inhibit growth of blood vessels. And why is this important? Well, if you think about cancer, cancer cells, they're very, very active, so they need a lot of nutrients, and therefore they're highly vascularized. So if there's a way to prevent blood vessel growth in cancer, then that would be a way of treating it, right? Because without blood vessels, without receiving nutrients, then the cancer cells will die. So many laboratories around the world are studying the cartilaginous tissue to understand what kind of chemicals, what is the signals, what are the mechanisms by which it inhibits the growth of blood vessels. So this is the structural classification. Then the function is based on what type of movement, because after all, articulation, if you think about it, is where the bones meet, but do these bones move upon each other or are they stationary? So those articulations that are immovable are known as synarthroses, and the ones that are mostly movable, so the bones that are components of these articulations move freely, these are the diarthroses. And these are the most complex articulations in our body. And then in between, there are the amphiarthroses that provide some kind of movement. Okay, so here, I know you studied this in the lab, but you have the structural classification and some examples. So the fibrous articulations, of course, are made up of fibrous connective tissue. And you see the skull bones that have these sutures. So the skull bones do not move upon each other. So this articulation is made up of fibrous connective tissue. And teeth, tibiofibular, articulations, they also are immovable. And some examples of cartilaginous articulations. They're made up of cartilaginous connective tissue. This is the tissue that does not have blood vessel supply. So the epiphyseal plates, if you remember, that are this cartilage that is located in the metaphysis, the area of the bone where you have the epiphysis and the diaphysis. So this area in the middle that allows for bone growth. Also the pubic symphysis. This is a very interesting area. So they are hormones that are produced by the ovaries. It's called relaxin. And as its name indicates, it relaxes this articulation so that during childbirth, it can expand. Then you have the synovial. So the synovial articulations, they are highly, highly complex. And you have the most important, the shoulder, the hip, and the elbow. And of course, the knee. This is, to me, the highly, highly complex, the most complex of all articulations. Now, in terms of functional, we have the, oh, doesn't oxytocin allow for stretching? Remember, oxytocin acts at the muscles, right? Here, we're talking about articulation. So the relaxin is released to allow the articulation to move a little bit. The acts on the pubic symphysis, so it's cartilaginous tissue, not muscles like where the oxytocin works. And remember that the oxytocin is produced by the hypothalamus. Here, what do we have here? Okay, so we have those articulations that don't move at all, then those that move a little bit, and one type of amphiarthrosis that is very interesting is the intravertebral discs. So where are these located? These are located right, as the name indicates, between two vertebrae. The synovial joint in the elbow allows for this movement, right? So you will see, we will concentrate and discuss the complexity of this synovial joint. Okay, so now we're talking about an amphiarthrosis, which is the intervertebral disc. And this is very interesting articulation. You see that it's complex. It has a fibrous ring, and inside there's a nucleus that is has water. And if there's pressure applied, then the water from this nucleus comes out so that the height of the intervertebral disc diminishes. So that's when you're standing up and the weight of the body exerts stress on the intervertebral disc. So the height decreases. But then when you're lying down, there's no stress. So the water comes back into this nucleus. And the intervertebral disc now increases in height. So it's like having a cushion between each vertebra. Okay, then we have the diarthrosis, which are the most movable articulations. And you see here sort of an outline or a cartoon of the knee joint. Now, if you remember, the knee joint now gets a lot of stress because when humans move from being quadrupeds to being bipeds, now think about the weight, the whole weight of the body, instead of being distributed among 4 different limbs, now the weight is all on top of 2 legs. So that's why bipeds, right? So what is the advantage of going from quadruped to biped? So the advantage seems that bipeds use less than 75% of the oxygen. So it's not oxygen in the air. What you have to think about is the oxygen in mitochondria. So you're making a lot of using much less oxygen because you have the movement just concentrated mostly on the legs. So that's a big, big advantage. So it's much more efficient than having your weight distributed throughout the 4 limbs, each of them working all the time and working to sustain the body weight. So this movement was a big, big evolutionary change. And it seems, I mean, there's all kinds of theories, but one of them is that it's being a biped is much, much more efficient. So, by the way, I created this cartoon on ChatGTP. I gave them the idea, so I make a cartoon to show that bipeds are more efficient than quadrupeds, and this is what it came up with. I think it's pretty cool. So the calorie saving steps, how standing up changed everything. It's a very interesting hypothesis. It's more than a hypothesis, and this is based on an article published by PBS, which is a very good journal. And it's a Scientific American article also, if you are interested. Okay, so let's go to the diatroses, which are the most complex articulations in our body. So all diatroses have specific components, but other diatroses have additional components. But these that are described here are common to all diatroses. So they all have the articular cartilage that's here represented in blue. So here you have one bone and another bone, showing, you know, the epiphyseal line. This would be epiphyseal plate that is already calcified, and here's the other one. Okay, so the articular cartilage, that's nothing special. Then you have the synovial cavity that is represented here. So what is the synovial cavity? First, it is limited by articular capsule that has two layers. So we're talking about these structures or borders that encircle the articular cartilage. So the outer membrane is made out of fibrous connective tissue, but the inner membrane that's here represented in the light pink is a synovial membrane. And this synovial membrane is very interesting because it secretes the synovial fluid. And you can think about the synovial fluid as being a lubricant. Like if you think about a motor, it needs oil so that the parts move smoothly upon each other. Here, the synovial fluid also has that function of being a lubricant, but it also has other functions that I will discuss and list soon. So here you have all diatroses have these structures. So the articular cartilage, and then you have the synovial, the articular capsule with the two layers, the fibrous membrane on the outside and the synovial membrane inside, that releases the synovial fluid that fills out all this space between the two bones. And here you see the periosteum. If you remember, the periosteum is a layer of connective tissue that is outside of the bone and where the tendons and ligaments attach. Okay, so let's now move to the synovial fluid. So the synovial fluid, remember, is filling up the synovial cavity. And what is its function? So it functions as a lubricant, so like an oil-based fluid that allows the bones to move smoothly upon each other. And also, it functions as a nutrient carrier. So why is this important? Because remember, you have cartilage here, and this cartilage does not receive blood vessels. So it needs to receive nutrients in another way that's not through blood vessels. So it relies on the synovial fluid. So the synovial fluid brings nutrients to the cartilage by diffusion and convection. What does that mean? So within the synovial fluid, within the cavity, while you're doing exercises, the synovial fluid moves around. That's why it's so good to do exercise also, to maintain the optimal condition of the articular cartilage, because the more you move around, the more the synovial fluid moves around and hits the articular cartilage, providing nutrients by diffusion and convection. So another very, very important and very, very interesting function of the synovial fluid is that it acts as a shock absorber. So you would think a pillow, right? A pillow, and actually they're the fat pads that are also components of this knee joint, but the fat pads are made up of adipocytes. But the synovial fluid provides a shock absorber by a different mechanism. So the synovial fluid is what we call a dilatant liquid. What is a dilatant liquid? A dilatant liquid is a liquid that changes its viscosity depending on how much stress, how much weight is exerted upon it. So if there's no weight, it's fluid, very fluid. Now, if you have weight exerted upon it, it becomes very viscous, almost solid-like, but viscous. So this is why the synovial fluid acts as a shock absorber, because when there's no stress, when there's no weight, when we're sitting down, there's no weight on the knees, so the synovial fluid would be liquid. Now, if we stand up and there's weight on the knees, the synovial fluid now becomes viscous. So to serve as a cushion, sorry. And this property of being a dilatant liquid is provided by these components, glucosamine and chondroitin, which are proteins that allow the synovial fluid to have this dilatant property. Okay, so here there are other components of the diarthrosis that are not present in all of them. So, for example, bursa. What are bursa? Bursa are these cavities, some of them in continuity with the synovial cavity, and they are filled of synovial fluid. Some of these bursa might not be in continuity with the synovial cavity, but they're all filled with synovial fluid. And here you see the tendons, that's fine. Then you see the fat pads. You see here. So this provides another cushion. So all this is to assist, provide a means for the two bones to move upon each other with a smooth way, in a smooth way. So the fat pads are made up of adipose cells, adipose tissue. And then you have menisci, you see here. So these menisci are made up of connective tissue, and they are subjected to a lot of wear and tear. So if they are destroyed, they have to be cleaned and removed because they can cause a lot of pain. So menisci are made up of fibrocartilaginous tissue. Then, to help the bones stay in place, they have extra ligaments known as accessory ligaments. Some are outside the capsule, some are inside the capsule. So they prevent extreme movement. So they prevent the bones to come apart. So they maintain them in this longitudinal and a proper alignment of the two bones. So you can see that this is all quite complex and how it's all formed properly to provide a means of support of at the knee joint. So here you see another view of the knee joint. You see the fat pads here and here. And here you see in light yellow the articular cartilage. So you see an extra bone here, the patella. This is to prevent, so we only can flex our knee backwards. We can't flex, all the way like this. So this prevents, stabilizes the movement of these two bones. And you see the menisci, there are cartilage tissue, and that's it. So very complex. So this is a very complex slide with many, many arrows. I made it on purpose so that you have the feeling of how complex this articulation is. And it's subjected to a lot of damage, especially in athletes. You hear many times football players and tennis players and so on that have knee problems. Now you understand why. Look at all these components that are there to stabilize the knee, but yet you still have damage and accidents. So the articular cartilage is to prevent rubbing of bones at the tip of the epiphysis, correct? So does the dilatant liquid act as another cushion to prevent articular cartilage from rubbing? Right, so let's see here. You see the articular cartilage, right? So when you have a lot of pressure, remember this synovial fluid is a dilatant fluid. So it loses its fluidity, it becomes um, viscous when there's weight put on it. So when there's pressure put on it. So if it becomes viscous, yes, as you say, it prevents the articular cartilage to rub against each other. And this articular cartilage is subjected to wear and tear. And you can lead to a lot of pain, as you can see. So arthritis, if you think about arthritis, what's arthritis? One type of arthritis is caused by the damage of the articular cartilage by overuse. So the bursa, they're also filled with synovial fluid. So just like in the synovial fluid in the synovial cavity, they provide nutrients and lubrication. So they contain synovial fluid as well. Okay, so what are factors that affect these articulations? So the shape of the articulating bones. So they have to be positioned and their structure has to be optimal to allow the bones that have sometimes very intricate shapes to move upon each other in a smooth way. The strength and tensions of the ligaments. So this is very important in exercises that keep stretch exercises. So one type, so you have weightlifting, you have cardiovascular, and you have stretch exercises. Those are the three types of exercises. So to keep the ligaments in the good standing, stretching is very, very important because you think about ligaments as an elastic band. So they need to be able to stretch and come back, stretch and come back. So if they are not maintained, if they don't have elasticity, then they might rupture. So the stretch exercises keep the function, the elasticity of the ligaments. So the arrangement and tension of the muscles. So the joints also depend on the tendons and the good standing of the tendons. A position of soft parts. So when one comes upon each other. So here you have the pelvic girdle and the pelvic cavity. So when there's childbirth, the head of the child has to go through this pelvic cavity. And the ability of this hormone relaxin to be produced by the ovaries and placenta allows the pubic symphysis to move a little bit to increase the diameter of the pelvic cavity. So this occurs during childbirth. Okay, so many things can go wrong with the articulations, so they need to be repaired. So there's major repair and minor repair. The minor repair does not require general anesthesia. It's ambulatory, and it requires only local anesthesia. And this repair is known as arthroscopy. So it does not require general anesthesia. So the practice involves making 3 holes. One, you put an irrigation instrument that releases fluid that keeps the area clean. Then you have another one to put in a scope so that the surgeon, the orthopedist, can see what's going on. And then the third one has really the surgical instrument that can be used to clear up the area, to trim, to remove like some pieces of ligament that have been ruptured. So this type of surgery has been developed, and it's a big advantage that you don't need general anesthesia, and you just need this kind of much easier surgery. Then, if the bones are so damaged and you need to replace them, this is known as, this process is arthroplasty. This you need general anesthesia, and you need to stay in the hospital overnight. And what happens, there's the replacement of the joint, usually by titanic modules. It's very hard to mimic articulations, the tissue, the quality of the tissue, and properties of the tissue. So most of these joints, artificial joints, are made up of titanium. Okay, now we move on to arthritis. We were just talking about arthritis, like how the articular cartilage can be subjected to wear and tear. So if there's no inflammation and the articular cartilage is damaged just because of the rubbing of the bones, like I always think about overusing exercises and weightlifting and so on, this has an effect. It's very healthy, but it also has an effect on the articulations. So this type of arthritis that does not involve inflammation is known as osteoarthritis, and it's only caused by wear and tear. So overexercise can, of course, damage the cartilage. Then you have another type of arthritis known as gouty arthritis. And this is a very unusual kind of phenomenon where you have the metabolites of nucleic acids that lead to the production of uric acid. And this uric acid can accumulate at the articulations and forms crystals. And this becomes crystals, hard crystals. So this becomes extremely painful when you move those bones. You can see here the crystals, this red area that is filled with solid crystals of uric acid. And why does this happen? So the uric acid, the source is the metabolism of nucleic acids. And so they should be removed through kidney function. But if the kidney is not working properly, then the uric acid accumulates and forms these solid crystals at the articulation. Then there's a third type of arthritis known as rheumatoid arthritis, and this is an autoimmune disease. Remember, we discussed different types of autoimmune diseases: multiple sclerosis, lupus, vitiligo. These are all types of autoimmune disease. And what happens is the macrophages, the white blood cells of an individual, turn against their own cells, their own proteins. So here, What happens is that the macrophages are going to attack the synovial membrane. And what they do is they create this swelling, this inflammatory swelling that is known as pannus. And you see here, if you see someone with this type of deformation of the fingers and with swelling, that means that this person is suffering from rheumatoid arthritis. So it's an autoimmune disease. And how do you treat it? We don't know the cause. We don't know vitiligo, multiple sclerosis, lupus. We have no idea why this happens. Why is it that our own macrophages turn against ourselves, our own tissue? So the only way to slow down this process is to give anti-inflammatory compounds. That's the way to treat the symptoms of these disorders. Okay, so here's another representation of arthritis. Here you see a normal joint with all its components. So the muscle with the tendon. Remember that the tendon attaches to the periosteum, which is the connective tissue that surrounds the bone. Then you see here the cartilage that has no blood vessels. And it depends for its nutrients on the synovial fluid. And the synovial fluid is contained in this capsule. And what produces the synovial fluid is the synovial membrane. So there's two membranes that surround this capsule. And here you see a bursa. The bursa contains also synovial fluid. It's not showing the fat pads. Oh, it's not good. Okay, the question is, what is the treatment for, oh wait, there's more. So can you repeat what the arthroscopy repair is? So arthroscopy is when you don't need local anesthesia, so you're not replacing a whole joint. You're just cleaning up and repairing, like, for example, if there's a ligament that is ruptured, then you don't need to replace the whole joint. You just need to replace that ligament. So it's minor surgery that does not require general anesthesia, and it's ambulatory. That means the patient goes in, has the surgery, and comes out usually on the same day. What is the treatment for gouty arthritis? So it's anti-inflammatories and mostly and painkillers. Okay, so another one. How can the uric acid get to the foot? Well, remember, in the blood, right? It circulates in the blood. And if the kidney does not get rid of it, it goes right into this soft tissue and it forms there these crystals. Why was it only in one toe? Well, this is the picture that they showed. It could be in more than one toe. It depends on where the uric acid accumulates. You could ask also, why is it that cancer only forms on one bone, right? It's by chance. There's no particular reason. So does cracking your fingers lead towards osteoarthritis, or is it a myth? No, it's not a myth. And I always see when people are cracking, it's not a good idea to do it. It can lead to osteoarthritis, but mostly wear and tear. Okay, so here you see the osteoarthritis, and you can imagine how painful this is. You have the bones rubbing against each other. So there's a lot of pain receptors here that give you the indication that something is wrong. And here you use painkillers. Sometimes you can use surgery or also physical therapy to align better the position of movement. And here is rheumatoid arthritis, where you see the swelling of the synovial membrane that gives this kind of pannus appearance. So, what can we do if we have the urge to crack our neck? Don't do it. Chew gum instead. You have to stop it. Just use something else so you don't have the urge to do it. Chew gum, do something else. Okay, now another very interesting. So all habits can stop the more you don't do it. That's right. It's not a good thing to do. Okay, so let's talk about these intervertebral discs. These are very, very interesting structures in our body. So what are they made? This is a cross section. So think that you have a drone looking at it from the top. So you see this ring that is the annulus fibrosus. So what is it made of? It's made of fibrous connective tissue. And inside, so there's many, many, many layers. So it's pretty strong. And its function is to prevent the inside, which is the nucleus pulposus, from coming out. So it stays within the area of where two vertebrae meet. So this nucleus pulposus contains a lot of water. And why is that necessary? That is necessary because to serve as a cushion. So you see here the height of the intervertebral disc. And when you're lying down, you're relaxed, and the water remains in the nucleus pulposus. When you apply pressure, when you're standing up and have weight on the spine, then water comes out of the nucleus pulposus. And the height of the intervertebral disc is smaller. So it can expand and go back to its original position. And all this depends on the release of water from the nucleus pulposus. Okay, so this is very good when we are all healthy. And, it's bad, like if you have a bad position sitting, you can have a lot of pain in the spine. One of the reasons is because this annulus fibrosus, its structure, the fibrous connective tissue, might lose its properties, might become soft. And what happens is that the nucleus pulposus comes out. Remember, the annulus fibrosus, its function is to not allow the nucleus pulposus to come out, to stay enclosed in this central cavity. But if the nucleus pulposus now becomes soft, it is no longer capable of enclosing the nucleus pulposus, it can protrude out and impinge on the spinal nerve. And that's what causes a huge, huge pain. And it's known as slipped or herniated disc. So if you ever hear about someone suffering from a herniated disc, you know exactly what's happening. And that is that the annulus fibrosus is weak, it lost its strength, and the annulus pulposus is protruding out and impinging on the spine, the spinal nerve. So here you see an MRI, remember magnetic resonance, that is good for imaging soft tissue. So here we talk about ligaments and soft tissue. You cannot take an X-ray to see this. You need an MRI. So what it's showing here, you see that the herniated disc at the lumbar position is exerting pressure on the spinal nerve. No, unfortunate, the liquid in the nucleus pulposus is not like the synovial fluid. It's not a dilatant fluid. It would be a great idea, right? If you could plan a new organism, that would be a good thing to do. Have the fluid in the nucleus pulposus be more change its viscosity depending on the pressure that is exerted on it. But unfortunately, that's not it. Also, it would be harder. Just think about if it would be viscous, it would be harder for it to be released when there's pressure applied to it, right? So the height of the intervertebral disc changes depending on the pressure. Okay, so here you also see, here's the good side, here's the bad side. And you see the nucleus pulposus again impinging on the spinal nerve. And here everything is good. Is there any way to prevent the pulposus from shaping out, or rather strengthening the annulus fibrosus? It's very hard, very, very hard to correct, to regenerate these structures. For now, sure, there are all kinds of studies trying to prevent. Usually, I'm going to show a slide, how can you treat this condition? I will show you. Yes, seeping out, right. So what are some of the treatments? Surgery. So, of course, surgery to straighten up this, this condition. Chiropractors, so through massage and straightening out the position of the individual, chiropractors have a big, big influence and a big role to play in this herniated disc. And then there's this practice known as TENS. What does TENS stand for? Transcutaneous electrical nerve stimulation. So TENS, what does it do? So what it does, it generates some electrical signals that activate the nerves around the area that is being damaged. And this electrical stimulus, what it does, it induces the release of endorphins. So endorphins are hormones released by the pituitary gland in the brain, and they are like our natural opioids. So here, you're not really treating the condition, you're just preventing the pain. So surgery and chiropractors, you might be able to improve the condition by using this kind of approach, by you just inducing the release of endorphins that are pain relievers. They're like, well, they're not aspirin because they're not an acid, they're a hormone that is released inside our body that prevents pain. Well, you say that it's like a Tylenol. Well, Tylenol is salicylic acid and it prevents the production, remember, of prostaglandins that are lipids. Here, the strategy is to induce the production of these endorphins, of these hormones. So can TENS be used to other conditions like endometriosis? Well, it's not used to induce, to prevent pain for other conditions, mostly for these involving articulations and muscle pain and so on. So I'm not familiar with this, sorry. So look at this, the hip joint. It's a nightmare. Just think about the hip, and if you're not in equilibrium, if you're walking with shoes that are not properly aligned, when I don't use heels, and I have nothing against people that use heels, but when I see them, I said, oh my gosh, what's going on in the articulations of those individuals? So they're not their bones are not properly aligned naturally, and there's going to be a lot of wear and tear. So what you can see here, the head of the femur, the articular cartilage is completely gone. And this, you can imagine, sometimes you cannot even move when you're asleep because the pain is so intense. So the raw bone articulates the raw bones articulate with each other. So in this case, there's no repair possible. You have to substitute. You have to go through surgery, arthroplasty, remember we discussed this, and you have to substitute by titanium. But this works pretty well. You will be surprised how many people go through this hip replacement, mostly at an older age. But it works pretty well. But you have to think about that this material is not bone material, so it's not good for eternity. So sometimes it wears out and has to be substituted, but it works pretty well for most people. So these are known as prostheses, the types of artificial joints. They can be, you see here the different shapes for the shoulder, for the knee, for the hip. And this requires major surgery, but it can be pretty successful in relieving pain and providing for movement for those individuals that require it. Okay, now I want to discuss an injury that occurs in many athletes, which you hear, a knee injury. Usually, or often, it involves the anterior crucial ligament. You see how the knee joint here is so complicated. You have the base of the femur and where it articulates with the tibia. And you see the shape of the femur with these condyles. And it's a very particular architecture of these two bones, how they meet each other at articulation. So, of course, you have the patella, here's the patella with its ligaments, and you have ligaments that are intracapsular. So this is anterior cruciate ligament, right here between these two condyles. So if there's a movement that is not in the proper direction and exerts a lot of pressure on this ligament, anterior cruciate ligament, or ACL. Maybe you've heard that name, ACL. What does it mean? Rupture the ACL, rupture the anterior cruciate ligament. And this occurs in men and women that are athletes. So what you do, the ligament will not grow back. So what can you do? You have to go and get a ligament from somewhere else and replace it. So there's no growing back you need to replace. So where are you going to get the ligament? So many times you take it from the patellar ligament. You see here the patellar and the patellar ligament. Yeah, all ligaments don't grow back, right? And they don't get any blood supply. So that's one of the reasons that they cannot grow back. Right, so here you can cut a little bit of the patellar ligament and then put it through, make a hole and put it through. This is what the surgeon does. And then fix it, put some kind of glue. And you have to take it with the bone. You see it has a bone, a little bit of bone on each side. So it fits perfectly in this hole. And so the patellar ligament is the first source where surgeons go and get a replacement for the ACL. Also the hamstring. But if not available, you can take an allograft or from a cadaver, right? So there are many options here to repair this, but it takes a while. And this is arthroscopic surgery. You only need local anesthesia. Okay, so here are some of the drugs that can be used to treat these disorders associated with articulations. So as one of you suggested, Tylenol, NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs such as aspirin, Tylenol, etc. Remember what they do? They prevent the production of those lipids, the prostaglandins. Then you have corticosteroids. These are steroids that are produced by the adrenal gland. If you remember, the adrenal gland is a small gland above the kidney. And you have glucocorticoids that I already talked about that are used to treat asthma. But these can also prevent inflammation. That's the whole idea, is to prevent inflammation that is associated with these articulation disorders. Analgesics, so these prevent pain. And they work locally, so they work at the nerve endings to prevent the transmission of the action potential that is generated by the pain stimulus. So their pain receptors are very, very simple receptors at the nerve endings, and they are activated by pain. So by using analgesics and preventing the action potential, the electrical current of traveling from the site of damage all the way to the center in the brain that is activated by pain, then you won't perceive pain. So you're not treating the condition. You're just preventing the symptoms. You're just preventing the pain. Analgesics. Gold compounds can give injections. The mechanisms are not well understood, but they can be useful. Now, gouty arthritis. Someone asked me, how can you treat it? So I said, with anti-inflammatories, decrease uric acid. So one thing that is associated with gouty arthritis is too much alcohol consumption, but not in all cases. So go down in red wine and alcohol. This will decrease uric acid. Remember, this uric acid is a metabolite of nucleic acid metabolism. And then immunosuppressants to slow immune reaction, and DMSO. This is dimethyl sulfoxide. I use it in the lab all the time. It has a very awkward smell, but it can be used locally to rub a site of damage, and it's also an anti-inflammatory. So these are some of the chemical strategies to address problems with articulations. Okay, so what is this? So I finished with articulations. Now we're going to start with the muscle system. So this is amazing, right? Look at the beautiful muscles in our body. It's quite incredible. And if developed and exercised, they can provide amazing movement, all kinds, from athletes to artists and so on. So we have to keep those in very good condition. And you know that the muscles atrophy. So the skeletal muscle cells, the muscle fibers, they don't divide. So reaching a certain age, our muscle fibers don't increase in number. They only increase in size. So if you see someone with a large muscle, it doesn't mean that that person has more muscle cells in that area. No, it's each muscle cell is the size is bigger. It's the muscle cells don't undergo mitosis. So analgesics, what they do is they prevent the feeling of pain by not allowing the electrical signal to reach the brain. So they're local anesthetics. That means the pain, the damage occurs at the specific area of the brain, of the body, and the analgesics prevent the traveling of the electrical signal generated at the site of pain. It prevents it to reach the pain center in the brain. So when you lose muscles, the cells are just getting smaller. Exactly. It's known as atrophy. If you don't use it, you lose it. So the muscle cells are still there unless they degenerate for some kind of reason. But if they're still there, they can be brought back to life by exercise. But the number of cells, especially cardiomyocytes, that's it. They're not replaced. For skeletal muscle, there's some few cells known as satellite cells that can't, under certain conditions, give rise to new skeletal muscle. And smooth muscle cells, they can regenerate. They can divide. Remember the uterus. The smooth muscle in the uterus increases in volume because the smooth muscle cells divide. Yeah. So, so our genetics determines how many muscle cells we have. Yes, but it's pretty standard. You know, we have around 600 and something muscles. You will study them all. You have to know all of their names and what they are used for and what bones do they attach, what kind of movement. But you understand that someone that's in the health sciences and wants to have a profession dealing with patients, they have to know these muscles to know what kind of movement they provide. Just think about if you have a patient on a bed and you want to move the patient and you use pick up the leg or the arm in a position that is not correct, then of course that is not a good idea. So you need to know what kind of movement of that these muscles provide for. Okay, so muscles, they have very, very particular properties. They can provide for motion. No other tissue in the body provides for motion. How they provide for motion? Because they can contract and they can relax, right? And they can be stretched. So when I'm stretching my muscle, when I'm opening my arm, and now I'm contracting. So the muscles are the only tissues that have this property, the cells. And also very important is that they can convert chemical energy into mechanical energy. So this is also particular to cells, muscle fibers. So the chemical energy is in the form of ATP. You know, ATP is made mostly by mitochondria. So these cells, the muscle fibers, can convert ATP, the chemical energy, into mechanical energy. That's amazing. And this is mostly because of a protein that is a component of muscle cells that's known as myosin. So this protein looks like a golf club, and the head of the golf club is an ATPase, is an enzyme that breaks down ATP to release energy. And this very simple phenomenon that is to break down ATP, to hydrolyze ATP, releasing energy, is the basis for muscle contraction, as you will see. We're going to go through the different steps. Okay, so what are the functions of the muscle tissues? So very, very obvious. So they provide for motion. Okay, even when you are standing still, some of the muscles are working, right? So to maintain the position. They regulate the organ volume. What do I mean by this? Think about a bladder. Think about the stomach. So that smooth muscle regulates the volume of the stomach and the bladder. So think about the stomach. What makes us feel hungry or what makes us feel full? So the stomach has receptors, stretch receptors on the muscle fibers. So when the stomach is stretched, when the smooth muscle at the stomach is stretched, those stretch receptors are activated and send a message to the brain. And that's to a brain center a center in the brain that's called the satiety center that makes us feel satiated. I don't know if you know what that word means. To feel satiated means that you feel full. You cannot eat anymore. So that's all based on this circuit of stretch receptors on the stomach that are activated, and that signal is sent to a center in the brain that's known as the satiety center, and it prevents or that gives us this feeling of being full. And it takes some time. That's why it's very important that when we are eating a meal, to eat slow, to allow this signal, this satiety, this satiation signal to reach the satiety center. Okay, so it generates heat. So 85% of body heat is generated at the muscle. So how is this heat generated? By shivering. And also the hydrolysis of the ATP also releases heat. So that's the two ways that the muscle can release heat to maintain body temperature. Okay, so what are some of the properties of the muscle tissue? So they're excitable. What does that mean? That means that if are stimulated, they can generate an electrical current that's known as an action potential. This electrical current is generated by ions such as sodium and potassium. So this property is also shared with neurons. Neurons and muscle fibers are the only types of cells that can be excitable. So when there's a particular stimulus that activates those cells, they generate an electrical current or an action potential. Now, they are also able to conduct that signal. So this action potential that is generated at point A can be conducted to point B, to point C, to point D, and so on. And that's what's meant by conductivity. So this is also shared with the neurons in the body. So both muscle fibers and neurons are excitable and they can conduct the signal to other points in the body. Now the muscle cells can contract. So this is particular to the muscle fibers. Now think about what happens when the muscle contracts. So this depends on the proteins that make up, so it's at the molecular level. So you have proteins in the muscle that are called actin and myosin, and they slide upon each other. They never change in size, but they slide upon each other when ATP is hydrolyzed. That's what allows for the muscles to contract or stretch. So it all depends on the sliding of these two proteins, actin and myosin. So they can also extend. So you can have actin and myosin overlapping like this, or you can have like this, that allows the muscles to increase in size or to contract. So extend and contract. And elasticity. That's a very, very important property because you want the muscles to, once the signal is gone, to go back to their original shape. So these are 5 important properties of muscles. Okay, now let's go back to histology. So I never covered histology until now. So I want to cover the histology of the muscles. We're going to cover the histology of muscle and the nervous system. So the 3 types of muscle cells or myofibers. So there's cardiac muscle, skeletal muscle, and smooth muscle. So how are they different or similar? So cardiac muscle and skeletal muscle, they are striated. So what does mean? You look at them, this of course is colored by computer or some way or another, but of course in us we don't see these colors. Why? But the muscles are red. If you go to the supermarket and buy a steak, that's muscle, and the muscle is red because it contains hemoglobin and it contains another protein that's very only available in the muscle. It's called myosin, and we will discuss this later. So both cardiac muscle and skeletal muscle are striated. And what does this striation mean? So these are the thick and thin filaments. Remember I told you about myosin and actin. So the thick filaments are made up of myosin. The thin filaments, that are the lighter ones, are made up of actin. And remember, it's the movement, the myosin and actin upon each other, that allows the muscles to move. Yeah. The smooth muscle looks like an osteocyte. Well, yes, but the osteocyte, remember, they have all these projections, right? And this is just thin, but yes, but they're not trapped like the osteocytes. Okay, a difference between skeletal muscle and cardiac muscle, the number of nuclei. Cardiac muscle only have one nucleus per fiber. Skeletal muscle can have many nuclei. And why? What is the advantage of having so many nuclei? So if you think about the skeletal muscle, the muscles that we are moving constantly, there's a lot of wear and tear, and so many proteins get degraded and degenerated. So you need to continuously be producing new proteins. So it's very useful to have many nuclei because remember, the DNA in the nucleus is the base that is used to make proteins. So that's one advantage of the skeletal muscle having so many nuclei, is the ability to produce so many proteins, to produce more proteins than the other cells, because these proteins are subjected to so much damage. Another difference is you can see that the cardiac muscle can branch, you see, and the smooth muscle does not branch. Another difference between cardiac muscle and smooth muscle is cardiac muscle is involuntary. What does that mean? We cannot voluntarily, as hard as we want, tell the cardiac muscle, now extend or contract or extend. No, it's involuntary. It depends on something that's called the parasympathetic nervous system. So the parasympathetic nervous system is a nervous system that controls the periphery. It's independent of the central nervous system. So cardiac muscle and smooth muscle, both of them are under involuntary control. That means we cannot control their contraction and extension. However, skeletal muscles, they're under voluntary control. I can say, I want to move the muscles in my hand, even in my nose, if I want to. So they're under voluntary control. So now, if we compare the cardiac muscle with smooth muscle, what do they have in common? Both of them are involuntary, and both of them have autorhythmicity. Autorhythmicity. What does that mean? That some fibers can generate an electrical signal without being stimulated. That's pretty amazing. That's in cardiac muscle. It's called the pacemaker. So the pacemaker doesn't need to be stimulated to generate an action potential. And if that doesn't work in an individual, if those cells that are specific to generate this electrical signal that controls the rhythm of the heart, then those individuals have to get a pacemaker that is a battery that substitutes for those that endogenous pacemaker. Okay, so the smooth muscle cells are not striated, and they only have one nucleus. Okay, so going over this, let's go and give some important information about cardiac muscle. So cardiac muscles, so it would be very, very dangerous if the cardiac muscle cells would come apart, because the heart would be broken, all the blood would be out, and there wouldn't be any pumping. So the cardiac muscle cells have to be attached to each other in a very, very strong manner. So you see here this area where one cardiac myocyte attaches to the other. This is known as the intercalated disc. And at these areas, the intercalated discs, they have a lot of desmosomes. So desmosomes are these formations that contain proteins that are like Velcro, that allow so there's stretching of the cardiomyocytes, but they don't come apart. It prevents them from separating from each other. They also, at the intercalated discs, have gap junctions. What are gap junctions? Gap junctions are channels that allow ions such as sodium and potassium to go through without having to go through the plasma membrane. So this is very, very important for signal transduction at the cardiomyocytes. Okay, so I talked about this. Here you see the pacemaker, right? It's the sinoatrial node that starts beating in uterus. Remember, if a mother goes to a clinic and wants to hear the heartbeat of the fetus, they can, because the sinoatrial node is already working. So these are the some fibers of the heart that instantaneously generate an electrical signal that is then transmitted to the atrioventricular node and then to the Purkinje fibers. So these are special fibers, specialized fibers of the heart that will activate all the other cardiomyocytes. Here you have the smooth muscle. So we already told them they're non-striated, they have central nucleus, and they're involuntary and also orthorhythmic, just like the heart. And an interesting aspect of the smooth muscle is how they are usually arranged along the gut. So they are arranged in these circle layers around the gut, the lumen of the gut. And what they do when they contract, and relax, this helps the food go down the gut. So you see here the bolus that is formed. And so from the stomach, it goes down. And how does it go from one area to the other? Through this mechanism known as peristalsis. So this peristalsis is caused by contraction and relaxation of smooth muscle. Okay, so let's see. I think I'd stop here. And next class, we will start with the histology of the skeletal muscle. Any questions so far? So the gap junctions are very important. Why? Because, so you want, in the heart, let me explain this. In the heart, you have the two ventricles and the two atria, right? And you want the muscles that make up, let's say, the right atria to all contract at the same time. You cannot have one cell contracting and then the other one and then the other one and then the other. No, they have to contract in unison. So what happens is these gap junctions allow sodium ions and potassium ions to go through so that they allow the contraction of the cells at the same time in unison. So they are channels that allow ions and such as sodium and potassium to go through depending just on size and not on charge. Okay. Okay, so any other question? So I'll see you next Tuesday and have a good weekend.
Tuesday's Monday schedule.
Oh, Tuesday's Monday schedule?
Yes.
Are you sure?
Yes.
Let me see. So then we will meet Thursday?
Yes.
So a week from today, right?
Yes.
Okay, let me just see here. Oh, it's not the right one. Because we have Columbus Day, right? Is Monday.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So I'll see you a week from today. You have tons of time to study. Someone asked me if I could post all the lectures so that you can start studying. Maybe I'll do that on Columbus Day or on a week from today. I will try to post all lectures so you can study. Okay, have a nice day and a nice weekend. See you.